Good morning, class. Today I wanted to give you just a brief video that shows you what happens when you submit a file to be printed. So this is a slicing software. So it's kind of like the interface between the 3D design software and the actual 3D printer. So in a lot like a regular printer for paper, you would have a screen that pops up that gives you options to print things, like if you want to print in black and white or color, the size of paper you want to use, if you want to print on both sides, that type of thing. This is just a much more complicated version of that. So this tells the 3D printer how to actually print the solid material that you see here. So once the file gets loaded in here, you can do a lot of things to edit. So before I would even determine, the settings, I can edit what I actually want to have printed. So I can click on the edit button, and then I have, of course, I can reposition some things. I can orbit around in space to see my object. I can rotate. So let's say I don't want to print it at this specific angle. I want to print it, let's say, straight up and down. So I can rotate it. That would be sideways. There we go. So you can rotate, reposition it, and then this would determine, the perspective that you would want to have it printed in. And then you could scale it. So say if you wanted the specific height to be 150 millimeters, you could type that in, and it will resize it accordingly, so that the maximum Z is 150, and then it rescales, the other dimensions as well. So scaling, rotating, then you could actually mirror a part, like if you had a left and a right part, and some other settings over here for editing. So once you have this the way you want it in here, I'm going to go ahead and undo this, cancel the edits. Oh, I saved the edits. So I have this here, and then in the settings over here, you can determine the layer height. So this is set to 0.3 millimeters, which is considered a large layer height. A fine would be 0.1 millimeters, which means it would take 10 layers to equal 1 millimeter, and 1 millimeter is super small. So this really slices it into very, very thin layers. And the reason you might want to have a fine instead of a coarse setting is if you're printing something that is something small that needs a lot of detail to it. So this is kind of one of the ways that you can determine the print resolution, which is kind of the detail. It's by determining how many layers are printed. So there's a lot of other settings, obviously, that I'm not going to go over. It'd take forever. The next important one would be the infill density. So inside this solid object, you can either print where it's completely all solid plastic, or you can print where there's like open air space in there. So you're not wasting plastic. If you don't need to see everything with plastic, you're not going to see anything inside. So if all you need is the external structure, you could fill it with a little bit of plastic to make sure that it's, rigid and sturdy, but you don't need it to be completely filled with plastic. So you can have it, standard would be 30%, light would be 10%, and then heavy would be 90%. And then you could put 100% if you wanted it to be 100% filled with plastic. And then the infill type is just the pattern that is used to infill. So let's go ahead and do a light setting, 10%. And then you can really see, what the pattern is. The speeds and such, these things are usually set for the printer itself. You don't really need to tweak these things. Rafting and priming, I'm not going to go over. Those are kind of more specialized things. But support material is really important. So let's say on my print here, I have, if you were to slice this from the bottom up, you'd print this layer first, and then build it up, build it up, build it up. But when it gets to this layer, you need to start printing a wheel, but there's nothing here to support it. So basically, if you were to dispense some plastic material at this height, it would just fall down and it would just create kind of a string of spaghetti plastic. And that's not what you want. So anything that is above the ground needs to have support to it. So support material is really important if you have things that need support. Otherwise, it's going to just squirt plastic in midair, and that's no good. All right, so to make this make sense, these settings, I'm going to go ahead and show you what's called a layer view. So after you get the settings the way you want it, you can click generate. It's going to slice the model depending on how detailed it is and how large the object is. It could take a little bit of time for the computer to slice it. So it looks like we're going to be doing about 500 layers. So 500, and our layer height is 0.3 millimeters. So that's, 150 millimeters, exactly. So that's what we want. So mathematically it works. All right, so here's the first layer that would print. And these lines represent the path of the plastic as it's being laid down. So I can show you from the very beginning the path that the 3D printer takes to print this first layer. So you can see this is a very tedious, time-consuming process. The printer just goes through and paints, with plastic, this first layer. Then you go to layer 2. And from my knowledge, I can see this is starting to build support material. So this is support for the wheels that are going to be suspended in midair. And this is support for the thing that the balloon attaches to, which is also going to be in midair. So as we move up in the layers, you can see each layer, what is going to be laid down in plastic. So it's just kind of a snapshot of each layer, the path that the printer is going to take, all the way to the last layer, which is a simple line of plastic at the top. All right, so this is a very simplistic view of that. I'm going to go to 3D, and you can actually see it being built from the floor up. So here's that first layer that we talked about, and I'm going to just increase the layers here. So here, this is support material. Let me orbit a little bit. So my support material is in a grid shape here. But here is the inside of my balloon car. And the outer walls is all made of solid plastic. But inside, I'm starting to see that there's just this infill material. And this is set to light, right, I think? So this is 10% volume inside with plastic. So as it's built, you can see here we have our first contact with the wheels as we're going up in space. So as it rounds out, you can see that the plastic is touching the support material, but it's not attached. It's designed in a way that you can kind of break it away fairly easily after it's done printing. So you can see that this column here is all support material that's being made for the thing that the balloon attaches to at the top. Let's see if we can see that. There you can kind of see all the way to the very last layer. So this would be the actual a preview of what the actual 3D print would look like when it's done printing. So all of this in here is support material, and this is set to a specific setting which generates support everywhere, anywhere that it's needed. So at the top here, if I didn't have support everywhere, let's see what happens. So I'm on support here, and I have support everywhere selected. I'm just going to deselect that and regenerate. So the reason you would want support everywhere is if you didn't, support would only go up to the first layer of actual printed material that you want to keep. Anything above that that is suspended in midair would not get support material. So this basically tells you, the printer, I want you to print support material on top of my actual print. So it's supporting anything that needs support, it's going to print support for. Okay, so here I'm hoping you can see the difference. It might be a little bit subtle. So right here, it's not printing support material all the way up. So there's a lot here now that is not supported. So there's an open gap here. So you really need support everywhere if you have a lot of suspended parts. See how this wheel is out farther than this wheel? So it's generating this support material, this column, all the way up until it gets to this wheel. So that's the difference between general support and support everywhere. One of the things that I wanted to show you is the importance of determining which direction you want to print an object. So for that, I'm going to go to a different print here. Let's look at Reagan's here. So this object is nicely laid out here for print, but the problem is, let me stop the rotation here if I can. So these parts here are over another piece of plastic. So in order to print this way, I would have to generate support everywhere. And if I generate support everywhere, it's going to generate plastic inside these holes that would have to somehow cut out. It's going to try to make a column of support for at least the top part of this circle, and that's going to be difficult to remove. So before you print something, a lot of times you want to determine which is the best angle to print at. So for this particular print, if I printed it at a different angle, I wouldn't need any support material at all. So let's go ahead and edit this. And we're going to need to rotate. And first of all, I have multiple items like separate solids in here. Each of these is a separate solid that can independently be printed, and I don't want to rotate all of them together. So the first thing I need to do is ungroup these solids. So now I can manipulate one at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the main body here and rotate. Oops, I didn't have the main body selected. I had this little wheel selected. Let's go ahead and click on this guy here. All right, so in my opinion, this would be the best way to print this object because there wouldn't need to be any support material. Basically, it supports itself as it's being printed. There's nothing hanging over that would need support material. So just thinking about printing and how solid material works with gravity, there's some thought process that goes into determining how to print something. But the most important goal of this video is just to expose you to this side of the printing process. So after you design something, there's several of these different what's called slicing programs that slice a solid into layers that can then be printed. This is just one version of that that's designed specifically for the printer that we have. So that was it for today. Hope you enjoyed this video and have a good day.